Before you do anything, begin by working in the trunk and disconnect the battery negative cable and cover the battery terminal so the cable cannot accidentally come in contact with it while you are working. If you need additional assistance with that task, please follow the link provided at the end of this video. BMW Z3 models equipped with a 4-cylinder engine utilize two multi-ribbed engine drive belts. The small outer belt drives the AC compressor, and the larger inner belt drives the alternator, coolant pump, and power steering pump. Some models have an idler pulley on the main drive belt, and some do not. Use this diagram to aid with removing and installing your drive belt. Before removing the drive belts, mark the direction of rotation if you're reusing your belts, and note the installation position. To remove the alternator accessory drive belt, you have to remove the AC belt first. Use a small flathead screwdriver and remove the dust tensioner cap indicated by the green arrow by gently levering off the cap by prying at the edges. The tensioner on the AC belt is secured in position using a locking bolt, green arrow. To relieve the tension, loosen the 13mm bolt. Once this bolt is loosened, the tensioner will release and you can remove the belt. You can now remove the drive belt from the AC compressor and pulley. Next, you will remove the alternator accessory drive belt. Using a flathead screwdriver, loosen the secondary air pump inlet hose clamp indicated by the green arrow. Then remove the secondary air inlet hose from the air filter housing by pulling it straight off, green arrow. Next, you will unclip the 3 air filter housing retaining clips, green arrows. One of the clips would hidden beneath the secondary air inlet hose. You have to reach in behind the filter housing to access it. Disconnect the intake air sensor electrical connector by pressing the wire release tab and pulling the connector straight off. Working at the airflow meter, twist the electrical connector counterclockwise to disconnect, green arrow. Then loosen the airflow meter hose clamp, yellow arrow. Once loose, remove the air filter housing from the engine compartment. Then loosen the secondary throttle body hose clamp at the rear air boot, green arrow. Once loose, pull the intermediate throttle body out of the boot. You can leave the cables connected, just lay it aside. Next, you have to disconnect the secondary air pipe from the pump. Squeeze the release tabs, then pull the pipe straight off the secondary air valve to remove. Now it's time to unbolt the secondary air pump. Start by removing the 2 13mm nuts, green arrows, that secure the pump to the support bracket. Then working at the back of the pump bracket, remove the wiring harness from the mounting clip, green arrow. You will have to lift the pump up and off the bracket. You will have to push the pump forward towards the firewall to clear the plastic clip on the rear of the bracket. Then remove the purge valve from the pump by pulling it straight up and off of the mounting bracket, green arrow. The purge valve is housed in a rubber mount. If it's stuck, lubricate it with some dish soap to help get it off. Lift the secondary air pump off of the mounting bracket and disconnect the electrical connector by squeezing the tabs and pulling it straight off. Next, you have to loosen 2 10mm nuts, about 10 turns from the lower air filter housing, green arrows. This will be enough to get it out. With the lower air filter housing unbolted, lift it up, fastener side first, feeding the intake tube, green arrow, out of the shroud in the radiator. Using a small flathead screwdriver, remove the tensioner dust cap, green arrow. Gently lever off the cap by prying at the edge. To release tension on the belt, use a 16mm socket to rotate the AC belt tensioner counterclockwise and slide the belt off the pulleys. Remove the belt from the alternator, then remove from the remaining pulleys. You do not have to completely remove it. With the air pump and the air filter housing removed, you now have access to the alternator. Working at the power steering reservoir, remove the 2 10mm fasteners, green arrows. Be sure not to lose the washers when removing. Lift the power steering pump up off its bracket and place it aside. Next, remove the two 16mm alternator fasteners, green arrows. Once loose, slide them out of the alternator and store them in a safe place. If the alternator is stuck or won't come off easily once the fasteners are removed, use a flathead screwdriver and lever between the alternator and the mounting bracket. Slide it off the top bracket and then lift the alternator up to access the electrical connections at the back. If you have not already, don't go any further without completely disconnecting your battery. You must disconnect the battery when working around these connections. Working at the back of the alternator, open the rubber cover, green arrow, to expose the electrical connections. Then remove the electrical connection nuts, yellow arrows. One is a 10mm and the other is a 13mm. If reinstalling an old or used alternator, you may have to move the bushing, green arrow, out of the mounting ear for proper fit to the alternator bracket. To do this, thread the bolt into the bushing, then place a 24mm socket under the bushing, and using a small hammer, tap lightly to drive the bushing flush with the mounting ear. Be careful and do not use too much force or damage to the alternator can occur. Installation is the reverse of removal. BMW Z3 models equipped with a 6-cylinder engine utilize two multi-rib engine drive belts. A small outer drive belt drives the AC compressor, and the larger inner drive belt drives the alternator, coolant pump, and power steering pump. Before removing the drive belts, mark the direction of rotation if you're reusing the belts, and note the installation position. There are two styles of tensioners, hydraulic and spring-loaded. Each has a unique way of releasing tension. Remove the air filter housing assembly. Remove the 10mm fastener, green arrow, then disconnect the airflow meter electrical connector, yellow arrow. Now loosen the airflow metering clamp, red arrow, and lift the air filter housing out of the engine compartment. Next, you need to remove the cooling fan shroud and the drive belt. Please follow the link provided at the end of this video for additional assistance with those tasks. Also, if you haven't already, you need to disconnect the battery. Again, please follow the link provided at the end of this video. Working below the alternator, disconnect the cooling duct, yellow arrow, grasp the duct and pull it away from the alternator while rocking back and forth. After you have disconnected the battery working at the back of the alternator, disconnect the electrical connector, yellow arrow. Then remove the alternator positive cable fastener, 17mm, green arrow, and remove the cable from the alternator. Working at the top of the alternator, remove the idler pulley dust cap. Then loosen the idler pulley bolt. Bolt sizes may vary, but 16mm is common. Slide the bolt out of the alternator and remove the pulley from the engine. Working at the bottom of the alternator, loosen the lower alternator mounting bolt indicated by the green arrow. Remove the lower bolt. Next, remove the alternator from the mounting bracket by rocking it back and forth while pulling it up and off the bracket. Once you wiggle it out of the mounting bracket, remove the alternator from the engine compartment. Before installing a new alternator, it's a good idea to check the alternator cooling ducts for debris. Leaves and other road debris can get trapped in the duct, preventing proper alternator cooling. This can lead to an overheated alternator and a charging system failure. If you need to move the alternator bushing, please follow the procedure described earlier. Working at the bottom of the alternator, install the lower alternator mounting bolt. Install the idler pulley through the alternator and fasten to the engine. Check that the idler pulley alignment tab is properly aligned in the notch in the alternator. Installation is the reverse of removal. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out another video in this series.